I'm Paul Danchek here with Danny Harper, who's the Senior Philanthropic Advisor for the Cure Alzheimer's Fund. Thanks, Danny, for joining us.
My pleasure to be here. Thank you so much.
Danny, I want to get your sense around leadership and how you see leadership in practice. But before getting into those tough questions, tell me how you got to where you are today.
Sure. So I started at Cure Alzheimer's Fund just a year ago, but I've been in fundraising for almost the last 15 years. Worked for my alma mater, Loyola Marymount, doing alumni relations, and progressed into fundraising roles there. Went to UC Irvine and worked in fundraising there for 6 years, including with some Alzheimer's research, and then found my way to Cure Alzheimer's Fund a year ago this month.
That's a pretty cool journey, kind of wiggle your way through to where you are. What have you found along the way about all those donor relations and raising funds?
What have I found along the way? I think, well, one, just thought about philanthropy that I always, people, when they hear what I do for a living, there's always this sense of, God, I could never ask people for money and never wanting to do that. And for me, that's not a hurdle because I work with really generous people. And I think we have an opportunity as fundraisers to share with people what matters with what our organization's doing and what their ambitions are and what they want to achieve, and making a marriage of those intentions of the donor and the opportunities of an organization. I found that most folks are generous and most folks want to make an impact. So it's really been an honor to work in my field because I get a chance to help people achieve their philanthropic dreams and hopefully do something really meaningful. Right now, raising money for Alzheimer's is super important and special. So it's been a real pleasure and honor to do what I do and to be able to get to know people and what matters to them.
When you think about your current role right now and in the fundraising space, do you fundraise for large donors, small donors, in between? What's your specialty?
Yeah, I'm called a major gift fundraiser. So that's sort of looking at donors who might give $25,000 and above on an annual or on a recurring basis. So primarily large donors, and I'm the West Coast person for my organization. We have about 30 in the organization, and everyone's based in New England except for me. So I'm the only one not in New England and who doesn't plan to move there. So I'm going to be our West Coast person and working with right now probably 200 or so major gift donors up and down California and the West Coast.
I want to get a sense in this leadership space on how you think about relationships involved. I want to think about it in two different ways. One is thinking about the donor side, and the other is thinking about your relationship to your home base. Where should we get started?
We can talk about donors.
Okay. As you think about the relationship with the donors, what have you learned along the way that informs your relationship approach?
Sure. We talked just a second ago about what I think most people are generous. Most people want to do something important, but that's not all it takes. There's a lot of organizations out there. There's big and small. If you think about just my field of Alzheimer's, there are local organizations, there's international. We're somewhere in the middle. And people want to make a difference, but they also want to understand what it is that their contribution might mean. And so from a relationship standpoint, when I'm getting to know somebody, it's important for me to take the time to understand them. It's important to take the time to understand what their goals and intentions are with any giving that they might do. So the relationship is the key. It really isn't about convincing somebody to make a gift. It's about convincing them, helping them have the belief and the confidence in us that we are an organization that can follow through. And that's entirely built on this communication process and is built on getting to know them and having an opportunity to share about us and having a back and forth. That's foundational. I mean, it's a necessary part of what we do.
When I think about the relationship side, you have a totally different donor set than you had before. Tell me what's similar and different than fundraising in different areas.
Sure. Part of it is geography, and I think that matters. We have donors in the Bay Area. We have donors in San Diego, LA, Orange County, as an organization all over the map. when I was with at a university before, at UC Irvine or at Loyola Marymount, we got to know people often because they were alumni of the university or they had children who were currently attending. And so we had a connection, we had something. With the group I'm working with now, the vast majority of our donors are personally bereaved by Alzheimer's. They've had an experience. Often it's a partner or a parent, and they want to make a difference, and they want to find an organization that is a good fit for them. So in terms of the folks that I'm working with now, they find us most often. They're doing their own internet research. They're looking online and trying to understand how different charities are rated and organized, and how we make our decisions in terms of what research we might give money to. And that's very different than being at a university where there's that affiliation, there's that sense of connection that's already built in. So we have to go find that. We have to create those opportunities. And that's a whole different process and a need that my organization is constantly working to try to fulfill.
I want to follow along that stream of thought, though, because what you're talking about is, this idea of connecting with donors. And, you mentioned about what the people who donate now generally have some direct tie of a family member, a connection on that side. You also talked about this idea of creating understanding in your donors of what the funds go towards and how that builds on this larger community. I suspect in your past experiences, you had some similarities, right? Where they had a direct connection. Maybe they went to university or whatever that direct connection might be. But in this case, it's something different. Do you notice that the way that people give within the space changes from an experience that they're having directly? So I went to a university, for example, so I'm giving back to that university because I had that experience, versus a loved one has an experience that I'm also connected to, although I'm not directly having that same type of medical experience.
I think there are similarities, absolutely, right? It's all personal. Odds are on whatever your own philanthropic goals are, whatever anybody wants to do. Often there's a personal connection. So it could be that you had a child attend a university. It could be that you have a grandparent who dealt with Alzheimer's disease. But that I think is fundamental, no matter what it is we're sort of looking at. I think the behavior changes when you're thinking about it as a gift where you support USC because they've got the most exciting football program, because you attended the university and it's exciting because your child's going there, because whatever those reasons are about maybe the pride in the institution. It's about helping those that come after you. It's about making that place better and solidifying your own legacy. I think health is very different. Health, human services. I think I can talk about Alzheimer's, but we could probably even bring in other organizations, for unhoused individuals or whatever the issue is. I think those hit people in a different emotional way. There's a case we can make about the economic need to help in any number of health and human services kind of organizations, but it's also about making that emotional connection have an outcome. So when you fund research, is there an answer to that research? If you're funding a clinical trial, is there a result? Did a new drug get discovered? Or, I think those kind of things, folks want to make a difference because often it's out of some sort of pain, or it's out of some sort of experience that was challenging. Whereas maybe with the university, it's out of just joy. It's out of love and respect and enthusiasm. And they're quite different experiences, I think, for folks.
But fundamentally, I'm hearing a similar type of stream of thought when you're talking about the emotional connection with the organization that you're donating towards. Whether it's the health side or the university side, there's some sort of emotional connection to it.
Definitely. I think, even to bring in things I learned at EML program, we often talked about, emotions can often be described as such a negative thing. Oh, that person got emotional. And that's derogatory in a way. Say like, oh gosh, they weren't thinking rationally. But if we really think about that, in reality, emotions are data points, right? Emotions are information. And I think we can turn that into actionable outcomes and say, I have this emotion of joy, I have this emotion of pain, I have an emotion of fear. That's data that I think donors use, and folks might want to then make a difference and be involved in something like a nonprofit. So you're right. I describe them as different types of emotions, but there's a through line there that our emotions are data points that help us make decisions that I think should be embraced. I think should be absolutely applauded.
So help me understand that a little bit more of, emotions as data points. How does that inform your work from a fundraising standpoint, not the administrative side?
Yeah, I think, again, I'll talk about Alzheimer's because it's what I'm sort of doing now, but it's also kind of what I know the best. It's a crushing disease. I mean, it's really a challenge, and people have long grieving periods often. The loved one dealing with Alzheimer's disease can have it often 8 to 12 years, maybe. So that's hard for people. So that experience can be angering, can be sad, can be frustrating because there's no drug that's going to cure Alzheimer's right now, and there's a lot of problems with the costs associated with the care someone needs. So I find when I'm working with donors, there's often not a wrong time. There is often a wrong time to approach them. I looked at an email today from a person who said, I'm the 24-hour caregiver for my partner. I have no bandwidth to talk to you. They may have wealth, they may have intention of doing something good with their wealth, but they are just 24-hour with their loved one. And they're like, okay, I have to understand that too in my approach, and I have to understand what it is that might, when I might be able to contact them to make a difference. And that's an interesting task in our work, is being present so that the donor knows we're out there, but never overwhelming them or never being really off-putting by coming on too strong, because they're going through these hard trials.
I mean, it raises a good point. And, you're using Alzheimer's as an example, but I can give lots of examples just in the organizational space of recognizing how emotions shift, how people show up within the workplace, for example, or how people interact with the system if you're coming from like a consumer type of perspective, right? Where you have this type of interaction where emotions do matter. Do you notice that the type of funding, the level of funding shifts depending where they are with their loved ones?
Certainly, yeah. I mean, there's a real practical answer. The care of Alzheimer's disease can be very expensive. Thousands of dollars a month, tens of thousands of dollars a year. So folks, regardless of their level of wealth, their level of ability to donate, it becomes mitigated by that need of having money available for their loved one. So yeah, there's very much, I think, a potential cycle there of where they are in their progression of the disease, and what it is that they're available, what's available to them to donate. Absolutely, I think that's an important consideration.
So carry this across to the organizational level. So get out of the donation space and tie it to organizations. What do you recognize about the impact of emotions as it has on organizational goals or organizational?
Well, I think emotions can easily improve or hamper into any interpersonal relationships. So, I think at a base level, collaboration is part and parcel of everything we do in all organizations, right? So this is going to be working with external partners, given donors or trustees of USC or whatever that level of folks are, and then our teams and our colleagues and who we work with. And we all go through these ups and downs, right? We're all constantly going through ups and downs. I think certainly the last 2.5 years, myself included, but plenty of my friends and I, we've talked about like plenty of days where it's like, I'm not doing great today. Today is not a solid day for me. If it's feelings of anxiety about the state of the world or feelings about any particular, the COVID threat. And that affects how we show up. That affects absolutely how I bring myself into the workspace. I think we could try to dampen that, or we could try to maybe mask it to a degree, but it's absolutely going to be present in some way. So I think there needs to be an awareness of that, right? From a management standpoint, from an interpersonal standpoint, I think we need to be conscious of how we're showing up and what we can do either to acknowledge it. I think that diffuses a lot of issues sometimes if you just acknowledge, hey, today's not a solid day for me. But I mean, I certainly have experienced that myself and witnessed that role of emotion in the interpersonal.
Yeah, for sure. Maybe I can feed off of it since I don't have a voice today. I'll be like, wait, take a time out today. I lost my voice. Well, we start getting into that space of recognizing how we're interacting with others. And your current role is doing something that has now become fashionable, that being remote working. And I say it's now fashionable because we all had to do it over the last 2 years in some capacity, while we might be full-time now. But the fact of the matter is there's organizations that have had this distance between us for years, right? And figure out a way to work in remote campuses or remote offices. And you're doing that now. What lessons are you experiencing right now of being responsible for the western part of your territory and having to interact with your main office, which is on the East Coast?
Yeah, that is sort of a question of the day of just what are we doing with this remote deal? It's become fashionable, it's become acceptable, it's become mainstreamed. There's a not small contingent of folks who think it should go away. And I think my perspective is there's a larger contingent of folks that are happy to keep it going. I think we've proven that there's an effective productivity to remote working, that we can get that done. But there's challenges, right? I mean, there's day-to-day challenges like time change issues, right? And trying to be respectful of colleagues on the basic level of just acknowledging that everyone else is on Eastern time and I'm on Pacific time. But there's other challenges about availability of the small talk and availability of how we build rapport. I've had a chance to chat with a few people that run organizations. I'm thinking of somebody who runs an organization with some 10,000 people. And it was important to them that everyone come back to the office because of culture. And I think that phrase gets used as kind of a passphrase for productivity or something that there's a class of folks that think culture equals time spent in physical proximity. And I think that there's a challenge to how do we create opportunities for great engagement with each other when we can't or just aren't being physically in the same space. There's literally no water cooler chat, right? There's literally none of that happening. So how do we create opportunities for that? And my current organization is doing a fabulous job. I mean, we do them on a monthly basis. There's one type of organization-wide Zoom where people can pop in and pop out. We do them on a team level in smaller groups. And I think that stuff is critical because, my opinion is at least hybrid or work from home should remain. That there's no reason why this couldn't be functional for many. Perhaps not all, but for many. But the cost needs to be acknowledged, and the cost of having a lack of the small talk and building rapport, that needs to be handled, I think, concretely. I think that needs to be handled proactively. And it isn't a given because I'm a person who loves to go meet people. I want to spend as much time as I can getting to know new folks. And we're limited with that right now. So I think with intentionality, we can create new opportunities for it, though.
I mean, in many ways, this is where your expertise comes into play of, being in this philanthropic space for so long, right? You've been doing this for many years, right? So it's not new that you're part of these major gifts. And it's a recognition that look, these types of small interactions matter, right? They matter in an organizational setting, but they also matter to the people that we serve or the people that are our clients or, wherever that relationship is within our respective organizations. And you found a way to do that with your donor base, right? Of having those small interactions without running into them, next to the water cooler or, going out to lunch with them. That's not something that you would do on a regular basis with them. What have you experienced within that space of working with donors that can be lessons for us within an organizational setting? When we're talking about the smaller interactions, but what type of lessons can you, Danny, as we're thinking about the small interactions to make them matter to build up this larger?
The internet cut out a little bit, so I'll start answering and hope that everything's going smoothly. I think, well, one, we did do that with our donors. So we absolutely created small Zooms where we could bring a funded researcher to come speak for 45 minutes and answer questions with a group of maybe 10 donors. We would do more emails and send videos and make phone calls and just check in with folks. There was a lot of that early in the pandemic. A lot of organizations, and I was at UC Irvine at the time, and we did this. We didn't directly ask for money from most of our donors at the beginning. We just sort of checked in with folks. And I think that's unique, right? I mean, because of the nature of the global pandemic, it felt appropriate to kind of read the room and say it might just be about checking on everyone's health and well-being. But we set a precedent for more interactions. It didn't all need to be cocktail parties at the private club. We could just create opportunities. We did that with our donors, and we certainly have done that in our staff. And I think that's why I believe it's feasible to have a work from home or remote scenario in most cases, because it's possible, because we're able to create these kind of interactions. So, I think people can be really creative about it, right? I mean, I think you can do this through Zoom, through the different technologies that are available, but it has to be done intentionally. And then I have sort of a further thought that I think it needs to be done from an organization standpoint where this isn't an afterthought. Most organizations who want to talk about culture, who want to say, oh, it's important that our folks, know each other internally, not just with the outside clients, then I think that should be on company time, right? I mean, I think that then organizations need to embrace that and say, cool, this isn't something that you need to do on a Saturday, unpaid on your own time. This needs to be at the forefront. If creating culture is that valuable to the organization, then let's prove it by paying people to do it, by organizing it, by staffing it appropriately, not just asking anyone to volunteer to do it, and really making it foundationally a part of the work. And I'm not sure how many organizations are doing it that way. I think there's probably a mix, if I had to guess. But those are some of the lessons. If it was worth my time as a paid fundraiser to call donors just to check in with them, to build that rapport and to make those connections and to keep it personal, shouldn't that also apply to my colleagues and my coworkers? And so I'd like to make sure that there's opportunities like that remain, both in my organization, but in any. I think that would be a valuable opportunity.
I mean, I think that's a really good example of just calling to check in without having an agenda. And, going about doing that. Well, you in some ways have the luxury of being part of two organizations during the two COVID years. If we think about those as, while we're trying to figure our way around getting into some normal rhythms. What have you seen from either one of the organizations that worked really well that's a practice that we should carry forward?
I think specific to work from home, like specific to this like remote kind of hybrid.
I mean, we can think about it from working from home, but thinking about when we're working from a distance from our other colleagues.
Yeah.
Right. Whether we're, what you're doing, right, where you have different offices, but they're physically remote from each other. We recognize that sometimes that happens, even in our work with LA County, right, where you have multiple offices throughout the county that are geographically close, maybe on a Saturday, but it's an hour or 2 hours to get to one campus to the other, right? So you get to this working from a distance.
Yeah. I think surely one idea is just embracing the technology that exists. Things like Zoom meetings, Microsoft Teams, whatever it is you're going to use, because those create that opportunity for some kind of connection. Our CEO writes an email every morning, sometimes about really important stuff, sometimes about a book he just finished, sometimes just a comment on the weather, but he does it every day. And I think it creates an opportunity for the organization to sort of check in. It's a small thing, right? It alone doesn't establish culture. For me, it's indicative, though, of an organization that wants to have a conversation, that wants to connect with people. It gets tied into, the obvious stuff, having weekly staff meetings and having monthly, like I said, we do a water cooler every month where a different topic will be brought up and play a little game or do something fun, and it's on company time. And I think those little things begin to add up to create the belief that this is important, right? And to really establish that this is how we do things, and people buy into that, and it creates that opportunity for, sure, we aren't physically in the same office, right? Most of my colleagues are in New England. I'm here in Long Beach, California. But at the end of the day, we can still find the time. And I think investing that time, just like with your family and friends, right? If you want to stay close with folks, one way to do it is to spend time with them. And I think virtually or in person if they're not the same, they can affect the similar outcome of saying, this is important, I'm investing my time into this, and I'm committing to spending time with you. And I think that's powerful.
So those little acts are contagious. What have you recognized in your delivery style over the last, say, 3 months, 6 months, that you picked up on from the culture that you're in right now? That's a good habit that's forming for you.
Oh, that's great. Well, so one of the things that was reflected back to me, I had my 6-month review recently, or 12-month, I don't know. I had a review recently. And in it, my boss referred to my habit of sending thank yous to my colleagues as little Danny Grahams. And I thought that was kind of fun. But it was actually me specifically channeling one of the EML professors who talked about giving feedback and what giving feedback requires to be meaningful to the recipient. That it isn't just, hey, thanks for your hard work. It made me happy to see you work hard, kind of thing. Making sure that it focuses on what the individual did, how it moved the organizational goals and our shared goals forward, and not making it about me and my experience of what they did. And I've really gone out of my way. I mean, I try to do them every couple of weeks. I try to find somebody to be sure to just go above and beyond to thank. In a written email, I'll often send it to their manager or copy them on it. And it was nice to see it reflected back to me recently that was being well received within the organization. Again, we're small, we're only 30 people. But I think that is a habit I learned in EML, but have really trying to take to heart with Cure Alzheimer's Fund, and is nice that it seems like it's getting some traction and getting some notice. So that's one habit, is thanking people for their work, and trying to do it in a way that really holds up their action and how it's helping the organization.
It's a really good example, right? Because it's not just a simple thank you or, a text of thanks of recognizing that transaction happened, but going deeper, saying what was the impact of it, either organizationally or individually. Those take time to write, right? Because it's not just sitting down and writing. You actually have to think through of maybe through their lens of what they're experiencing, through your lens, what you're experiencing, and tying it all together. Tell me about how you went about starting it, and why you continue it?
The answer about why I do it is that, at least in some large part, is hearing my wife's stories about her work, and when she does and doesn't get that kind of feedback from people with whom she works. And I thought, gosh, there are occasions where somebody will just send her a really thoughtful note and say, gosh, you really made this better. Thank you, whatever. And then there's times where that doesn't happen. And hearing her stories has probably been one of the larger sort of things that calls it to my attention, at least. And I've tried to really focus on it because, one, I do think it's important. I think I jokingly say I'm 39, so I'm just enough of a millennial that I want praise and gratitude, right? That I'm aware of that in myself. And I think most people do. Most people want to know that their efforts are meaningful and that their efforts are worthwhile. So to that degree, I think it's just worth it, right? I think, it's just worth spending those few minutes, whatever it takes, to thank people. And I can't do it every day to everybody, but if I can think every couple weeks, do something, it seems worthwhile.
It reminds me of a quote that I saw not that long ago, and I'm just paraphrasing. It was something like, recognize the effort, not the outcome. Being reinforced where those behaviors are taking place and not necessarily the outcome that you've reached along the way.
That's interesting, because in fundraising, often, we might spend a year working with somebody and we might believe they have the capacity to make some donation that could be, often the phrase is used, transformational, right? I mean, maybe a $1 million or a $5 million gift. You think, oh my gosh, this could be really something. And then it doesn't happen for any number of reasons. And it could be, their health changes or their interests change, or who knows. That happens. And it doesn't mean the effort you put in all along the way, and the effort that I did, and those that, in our marketing staff, and those in our events staff, and all these different folks, that their effort was in vain, not at all. And so we still need to hold up the good work that people did, even if it didn't result in some big gift. And I think we clearly want the big gifts, right? I mean, clearly that is the biggest win. But in my field, we absolutely, and I think that would be translational to anything, to any other industry. We need to honor effort, because you don't always get the results you're looking for. And that doesn't mean that the effort was not entirely worthwhile.
We've been talking about it in an organizational context, but we recognize relationships are everywhere. Do you find that you use that same technique with your loved ones? Friends, family, loved ones?
Thanking folks? Probably not as diligently, no. I think I probably ought to do. I'm pretty proactive. I think I'm known in my family and my friend groups as I'm proactive in keeping up with people. So I'm the one that would start the text chain, or the one that, I'm still the person that calls, which I know not everyone accepts that as reasonable these days. But no, I probably don't do that as much as I should. Now you're going to get me thinking on that.
Well, I'm not asking you to place judgment on that you should be doing or not doing it. More of a recognition that our environments are different depending on how we're thinking about that group of individuals, and whether we're thinking about a group capacity or donor capacity or a friends group or a family group. Right, all that changes and shifts our strategy and how we interrelate with them. And there's different strategies that we use because we know that they're effective.
Yeah, certainly. Yeah, I don't, I always try to write thank you cards, for birthday gifts or whatever, but that's not the same as the way I sort of would acknowledge or thank coworkers. Yeah, they're definitely different for me. And maybe whether or not they should be, I'm not sure. I'll have to work on that a little bit. But
yeah, I don't know if it should be either, which is why I'm asking you the questions. Well, look, when we shift behavior, sometimes they come across as just being weird.
Yeah.
And is it getting into that space where look, we just don't have that type of relationship or that type of interaction, maybe the setting is different. I don't actually know the answer. All I know is I'm horrible at writing thank you notes, and my aunt reminds me of it. I want to ask you a question about this team dynamic and how you think about teams, particularly when we might not have a lot of staff members, direct reports, any at all, but recognize that there's a lot of indirect reports that we have. A lot of people maybe at the same level, if you think about it, maybe that peer capacity, and there's still some sort of team dynamic that happens. How do you think about teams in the work that you do right now?
Yeah, so team is one of the reasons why I moved from Irvine to Cure Alzheimer's Fund. I was happy at UC Irvine. I had a great job and great colleagues. I didn't have a sort of close-knit team of other people at my same level, but at the new organization, I do have folks at my level, and I wanted to be able to learn from other people. I wanted to be able to share ideas. And so one thing is just we've been able to do that. I mean, really, it's met all my expectations, which has been really kind of fabulous, of having folks with whom, I can share, hey, I'm using this way of communicating with donors about this topic. How are you doing it? And we're able to share ideas. So from a team standpoint, it's different than maybe somebody who reports to you because you have a particular responsibility for evaluating their goals or different factors that go into how they're compensated and all that thing. So I really do think about it from I guess going back to that interpersonal idea of how we interact with others and what builds people up. And from that sense, title and hierarchy are far less important, right? I might be managing up to my boss or the CEO, or I might be working with colleagues at the same level. But I want to build folks up, certainly celebrate their wins, create opportunities where I can learn from them as much as possible. I'm hungry for that. I mean, again, it's why I went to Cure Alzheimer's Fund. So I'm constantly sort of asking for and looking for those opportunities to learn from my team. And that's been important to me to be able to do more of that and to be able to connect with people who can make me better. I would jokingly say I want to work for people who are better than me. And that's true probably in a lot of cases. So it's nice to be able to then be in an environment where they lift me up, right? Their performance is at a level where I got to keep up. I got to work harder to catch up. So I look for that in a team environment.
Sharing experiences certainly makes a difference, right? Of being able to learn from our colleagues in that type of capacity. But at some point, great ideas just have to emerge within that type of environment, even to ask the question, how do you recognize great ideas emerging within the team dynamic that you're experiencing right now?
That inevitably is going to come up in conversation. It's inevitably going to come up in just our spending time together, which probably comes a little bit back to this idea of being remote or at least distant of each other. And so what do we do about that? And we do create opportunities. Just my team alone, every other Tuesday, we get together. It's 8 a.m. Pacific and 11 Eastern, and we have coffee or whatever virtually and chat about ideas, about sometimes benign stuff, vacation or music we're listening to, and then sometimes about important stuff, some issue we're having, trying to get a donor to respond to a proposal we sent. And I think having that conversation and listening to each other, I mean, for me, that's maybe the only way that I really see practical in terms of recognizing good ideas, fine-tuning them, working on them together, trying to make some progress with that. I'm an external processor. I need to talk through things. So if I'm, considering if I'm going to change jobs, I want to talk to my wife, my best friend, my mom, just run it through with a handful of folks. And I think similarly on teams, my learning style, at least, would be communicating in conversation with a handful of other people and batting around a few ideas and say, oh, but would you do it that way or that way? And, kind of work it out. For me, I think that's the way to go.
How did those coffees get started?
Do you mean like each day? How does it get, like, who kicks it off? Or do you mean how did it begin?
How did it begin to even be able to sit down? I mean, what I'm hearing is, within a Zoom or Teams context, right, there's some formality because we have to put it on calendar so we're all in the same virtual space at the same time, right? So you have that formality. But what I'm hearing you describe is that, look, that formality gets knocked down pretty fast. Yeah. And the conversation is more organic and it flows. Yeah. And I'm wondering how that type of conversation started, like how'd you get that started that that you're having coffee and anything's on the table?
Yeah. So my colleagues were doing it before I began, and they were doing it because they recognized that they didn't have that chance to just chat in the hallways, right? They didn't have the chance to chat in the parking lot. And they craved it too. They knew that there were missed opportunities to learn from each other and to share ideas. And so they came up with it as the solution was, we are not doing as good as we could do because we don't have these chances to just chit chat from time to time. So they set it up, and one person is the pseudo moderator, at least, who sends out the calendar requests. But yeah, we all just get in and start chatting, right? I mean, we just sort of go as you would if you all just sat down at a bar together or something.
Anytime we do something new, there's some initial lifespan to it. Then either it continues on or it tapers off. As you are thinking about either this example or other examples that you've been part of where there's been these little kind of startups, what sustains it? What keeps it going?
Yeah, what a question. I mean, that's the first thing that comes to mind is if it's serving the need that it set out to serve. For us, we're going to keep working primarily remote. So I think, to the degree that working remote creates challenges, that challenge is the inability to have conversations kind of ad hoc. I think the meeting will get sustained because that need will be sustained. We will continue to have that desire to have casual conversations. Not everything needs to be a meeting with an agenda. In that context of just communicating and sharing with people. So I think this meeting will stay, but I think it'll stay because the need will be sustained for the foreseeable future. So if that could be extrapolated as the answer to why certain initiatives do and don't, I think change is always hard. So when you talk about new initiatives in terms of doing something different, gosh, I think there's a whole nother set of complications that would say, why would that change work or not work?
So define for me what the need is in this case, because I'm hearing a lot of different layers to it. And it's maybe not as clear as what I think it might be, right? Because what I'm hearing is, look, a time for us to connect, that's a need. A time to share ideas, that's a need. Working remotely and seeing that this is going to happen, at least in the foreseeable future, that's a need. How would you frame what the one need, or if there's like a cluster, what is that need, if you can put your finger on it?
Yeah, hearing you reflect them all back, I guess the theme of the needs is for interpersonal communication, but then, but with the layer of it being kind of open format. So maybe that's the open format communication where we're able to kind of let the conversation wander. That's poor meeting etiquette. If we came to talk about the event that we're having on October 1st and everybody else wants to chat about their holiday plans, that's a poor meeting. But if the meeting is open format and the meeting is about just having conversation and building rapport, and I know a little bit more about you than I did when we started 45 minutes ago. Well, now next time we see each other, that kind of builds rapport. So I guess that's my answer, is it's open format exchange of ideas is important to us. And we're all extroverts, because I think fundraisers are generally all extroverts. So specific to my group of folks, we're all desperate to just talk and communicate. So I think that's the answer.
In some ways, it falls back full circle to where our conversation started about building rapport with each other.
Yeah.
And seeing it as a way to check in with each other without having an agenda and an expectation.
Because that's what you would do if we bumped into each other at the kitchen in the office. It's not going to be necessarily, oh, I have my 5 agenda items and I'm going to knock you out with these 5 agenda items. It's, how was your weekend? Did you go on that trip you talked about? It's going to be about this other stuff, which I think is rapport building. Maybe then we circle back to, oh, I got that, I got word back from the donor, we might get some business done. But that free flowing exchange, I think, has real value.
What happens if an organization is missing that rapport?
Yeah.
What happens?
I think people will still function, right? People will still do their jobs. But I think you miss out on, there's potential that will never be actualized because ideas are going to not be brought forward. We had an example recently where we have a group that the terminology won't match, say, the university, but if there's the trustees at the top, there's a board underneath that board that are not the fiduciary board, but they have some responsibility in our organization. And in a meeting the other day, an idea came up about how we might utilize these folks and get them involved with thanking our donors. And it came up super organically. And I think had we not had the opportunity to just be idea sharing and just kind of free flowing, I'm not sure that idea would have come to the surface. So to extrapolate from that, what I'm thinking about is just creativity, testing new ideas, a little bit of experimentation. I think all those things come out of the free flow, the open format conversation. And if there's not rapport and I'm just doing my job and you're just doing yours, we're not really going to build on each other's ideas then. So I think that's what I'm thinking about now, is the answer to the question, what doesn't happen if there isn't this format. That's what I would fear wouldn't happen.
As you're describing it, I'm envisioning like this whole idea space and creativity space of just this gap, right, where it's just not happening. What also was surfacing for me is this new philosophical design that's happening right now. And, all of our great philosophy comes from TikTok. This idea around quiet quitting, where people are just doing the minimum and getting by, right?
Yeah.
And not getting into other space of going beyond what they're either being told to do or what they think their job description is telling them to do. And I'm wondering if that ties into what you're also describing. If there's a void, is that what also might happen?
I think it would be interesting to talk about quiet quitting. But if I could bracket that one on the shelf for a minute and more think about it in terms of, if I have more rapport with my colleagues, more feedback from my boss, responsibility for people who report to me, and we're interconnected, I could imagine that I'm feeling more motivated to do more things and to go a little bit further and work a little bit harder and push new ideas out there. And if I don't have those connections, if I'm not getting feedback from my boss and having rapport with my colleagues, then maybe I am just clocking in at start time and clocking out at end time, and I'm not engaged as much in the work. So I think that's a way of repeating my last answer for myself, is where that rapport creates more opportunity for engagement and creativity and productivity makes the organization more effective, makes it more enjoyable, and that's a virtuous circle that makes it better. And then the opposite would be true, right? Without that, it makes it worse, and sort of vicious circle. The whole quiet quitting phenomenon seems like a bunch of garbage, because I think looking at it from the perspective of, if people aren't being recognized for the work they're doing, and they're not being promoted over the course of multiple years, or even, there's cases of people that had to go into work when it was peak risk for COVID, and they weren't getting hazard pay or anything, nothing from their organizations recognizing what work they did above and beyond. And now that they're saying, look, pay me for the work I'm doing, you've given me 50% more responsibility, and you've not even addressed pay or title or any of these things. And it being called quiet quitting seems like the worst kind of obfuscation about what's actually happening. Someone else called it quiet firing, and that's just where an organization refuses to give you a raise over many years. And so finally somebody says, hey, I've had enough, and walks away. And so I think that phrase for me is a kind of an interesting one of how popular it's become lately.
I mean, it's very popular, but the phenomenon isn't new. I mean, we talked about this in the research side. I mean, we call it quitting and staying. And in public service, we see it happen all the time, right? Where people just get locked in, they do the minimum amount of work. It's with the organizational design where the structure is makes it difficult or impossible for someone to get fired or removed from their position. Yeah. And they go in and do the minimum to get by and do it year after year, right? And getting away from the space that you were talking about, that creative space and the idea space and all that sharing doesn't happen because the organizational culture facilitates something else that doesn't allow it to happen.
Yeah.
Or encourage it to happen, maybe.
Yeah, I mean, that is interesting, right? Because I think my organization, we did a survey of strengths and opportunities in the organization and holding it up against certain values. And our connection to mission is off the charts, right? People understand that our organization is trying to cure Alzheimer's disease. And the people who work for us say, yes, we are in. This is a worthwhile endeavor. My work isn't just about paycheck. My work is about doing something for the world. And I think, okay, that doesn't apply maybe to every public service job, right? I mean, maybe not everybody feels that way if you work in, I don't even name a department and then get in trouble. But I have a friend that works for the Parks and Rec department outside of LA, but he loves what he does. And you might look at that as like, oh, you're not inventing new software and you're not curing Alzheimer's disease. Like what, like you're running parks. And yeah, he's running parks. Like it's the coolest job and he absolutely loves it. And it's super amazing. And he makes a difference in his community. And I'm just thinking, can every job have a mission connection? Or are there some jobs where that's just not available?
And how do you answer that question?
Gosh, I don't know. Because I think of when I said I didn't want to name a department, I'm going to now. I was thinking of like the county assessor or something where you think like, well, how fun could that be? Like that sounds not exciting. But also the assessed property values is massively important to people and the city and our tax base and therefore our parks and our health departments and all these different things. So I would hope so. I mean, the ambition would be, yeah, we need to find a way to make mission connect in any organization, that should be the goal. I fear in practice that's unlikely, but a big challenge.
Last week I was at a conference all week, and in the same hotel was the Stamp Collectors Association conference, yes. Which I had no idea there was a Stamp Collectors Association. No. So I ran into folks all the time and got into the elevator and they're having a sidebar conversation and they're just totally geeking out about stamps. And I'm sitting there thinking, how can you get excited about stamps? Like, are stamps really a thing? Well, what dawned on me was that people can get excited about whatever they're passionate about. So we were talking about, the auditor's office or, finance or parks. people get really excited about it, right? So they can bring the same type of passion because they're identifying what that mission is.
Yeah.
And you're able to really clearly identify what the mission is of your organization. I'm not sure that everyone can do that with their own organizations, but the people that get really geeky about it and get really excited about it and passionate about it, they totally can. Right. Well, that's why I'm really curious about this whole quiet quitting side of, are the people that are experiencing it, are they totally in sync with where their organization is going or the purpose of the organization or why they do it or seeing that greater purpose, regardless of what the industry is?
Right. Right. Yeah, I would think the answer is no. I mean, I don't know that, but it would seem evident that that's not true. Yeah, because people are more willing to walk away if there's not a great environment and great people and mission and all these different boxes getting checked across the board, or not even all of them, but more boxes being checked.
Or feel like they're part of it. Right back to your idea of building rapport, of feeling that connection. Danny, I feel like we could go on and on in this leadership space. I want to be mindful of your time and really just thank you for joining us and sharing your insights around leadership and practice. I mean, I've been filling up a notepad over here. A lot of nuggets that you've been throwing out there because the work that you're doing matters. I mean, it matters, from that large sense on the work that you do with the Alzheimer's Fund. More fundamentally for me, it's the work that you do on the human scale of being able to interrelate and interconnect with others and seeing that as a big part of your work. And I just want to thank you and honor you for all that you do within this space. And thanks for joining us and sharing your insights today.
Thank you very much. My pleasure to be here.